In this video, we explore horror stories of elder caregivers. Sometimes caring for older people means facing something much darker than the looming shadows of old age.
Elizabeth's return.
The house was silent until I opened that album. Since then, she appears every night, as if she had been waiting for me. I had started working as a caregiver for Mr. Charles just over a week ago. The old man was 89, and although his body was frail, his mind was still sharp. His house was huge, filled with rooms that seemed abandoned for decades. It was in one of those rooms, while cleaning, that I found the photo album. It was hidden in the corner of a wardrobe, covered in dust. At first, I thought it would be interesting to see old family photos. But when I opened it, I noticed something strange. In many photos, someone was missing. Someone had carefully torn pieces from the images, always from the same spot. The most unsettling thing was that in some photos there were fragments of a woman. An arm, part of a dress, but never the face. It seemed like someone wanted to erase every trace of her. Curious, I brought the album to Mr. Charles, hoping he would explain what had happened. But when I asked him, his demeanor changed completely. The friendly smile disappeared, and with a somber look, he simply said, "Don't speak of her. Don't meddle in what you don't understand." I thought it was just an overreaction, but that very night, something started to feel wrong in the house. Everything was silent until I heard the creaking of furniture downstairs. I got up to investigate, thinking Mr. Charles might need help. However, when I went down, everything seemed as I had left it, yet different at the same time. Suddenly, I felt a cold breeze that didn't make sense in that closed-up house, coming from the living room. I walked slowly down the hall, unsure if I should approach. As soon as I peeked in, I saw her. She was standing with her back to me, next to the window. A woman, dressed in worn, old-fashioned clothing. Her skin was grayish, almost translucent, and her tangled hair fell down her back. I closed my eyes tightly, and when I opened them again, she was gone. The following appearances were subtle. Mostly it was the feeling of being watched, and a shadow gliding through the house. Then things started to move. A chair displaced, a door ajar that I was sure I had closed. One night, while preparing tea for Mr. Charles, I heard a whisper behind me. It was barely audible, but it made me shiver. Turning around, I saw her again in the kitchen, still hiding her face under her hair. I couldn't see her eyes, but her mouth was twisted in a smile that chilled me to the bone. Before I could react, she vanished once more. I kept trying to convince myself that it was just my imagination, but the atmosphere in the house grew more oppressive. The whispers became clearer, calling my name at any hour of the day, and the apparitions were becoming more frequent. Sometimes I would see her through the windows, as if she was spying on me from outside. But the worst was when, one early morning, I woke up to find her standing at the foot of my bed, her eyes black as voids staring at me intently. I asked Mr. Charles one last time. I begged him to tell me who she was and what she wanted. With eyes full of sadness, the old man whispered that the woman was his wife, Elizabeth. He showed me a picture of their wedding, the only memory left of her. He said Elizabeth had died a few years ago in a psychiatric hospital, where she had been committed after a severe schizophrenic episode. Before being admitted, she had tried to erase all traces of herself, tearing every photo of her that existed in the house. That very night, while trying to sleep, I heard soft footsteps approaching my room. I knew it wasn't Mr. Charles. I didn't dare move, but I could feel a presence at the foot of my bed. Then I saw her. She was closer than ever, her face twisted with rage and pain. The air turned cold, and the whisper returned, this time clearer. "Leave, or you will stay with me." At that moment, I knew that if I stayed there, I would not leave that house alive. I ran. I ran without looking back, hearing the echo of her footsteps chasing me through the halls. When I crossed the front door, the sensation of cold vanished, but something inside me knew it wasn't over. I never went back. I didn't want to know what happened to Mr. Charles or that house. However, every time I turn off the lights at night, I can't help but feel that Elizabeth is still looking for me, trying to keep me with her.
The House of Silence.
I knew something was wrong in that house. I confirmed it when I saw that dark, terrifying figure slowly approaching me. I had taken the job as a caregiver for an elderly woman who, according to her family, had been silent for 10 years. One day, she just stopped talking and lost herself in her thoughts with no medical explanation. The house where she lived was at the edge of the city, old, with a front garden that had surely been beautiful years ago, but was now dry and forgotten. The first days passed without much incident. Her name was Claire, an 80-year-old woman who spent her days in her chair, always looking at the same corner of the living room. Although I tried to distract myself with my tasks, I couldn't shake the feeling of discomfort in that house. Her gaze was empty but fixed, as if she were seeing something none of us could. Sometimes, when I passed near her, I felt a strange pressure in my chest, as if there was something in that corner, something invisible, but present. Everything started to change one stormy night when the power went out for a few hours. While checking the candles, I heard a soft noise, like a whisper. It was coming from Mrs. Clare's room. It shouldn't have been possible. She didn't speak. But when I opened the door, I saw something that chilled me to the bone. The old woman was no longer looking at the corner. She was looking at me. For the first time since I met her, her eyes were not empty. They were deep, dark pools of fear, as if she were trying to warn me of something, but her mouth remained closed. I tried to calm myself, thinking maybe I had imagined the change. I approached her bed to adjust her position when I saw her lips move. She didn't say anything, just opened and closed her mouth, as if trying to speak but unable to. I stepped back, trying to stay calm, when suddenly I felt an intense cold down my spine. The storm still roared outside, but this chill was different, deeper, as if something was standing right next to me. Days later, I started to notice stranger things. The shadows in the house didn't behave as they should. There were moments when I felt like something was following me. One night, while dusting the furniture, I saw a tall, deformed figure, covered by a black veil, making it look like a shadow without defined edges. It was standing in the corner of the living room. Within seconds, it vanished. I stood there, in the middle of the living room, not understanding what I had just seen. A part of me didn't want to believe it, so I decided to chalk it up to exhaustion and tried to move on. The next night, the atmosphere in the house was even more oppressive. As I tried to sleep, I heard footsteps in the hallway. I thought maybe the old woman had decided to move, but when I went to her room, she was completely still. However, the wardrobe door was slightly ajar, something I never left like that. I slowly approached, and as I opened it fully, I felt a cold draft, as if something invisible had just left. Suddenly, Claire moved her lips again, this time whispering something very low, something I could barely understand. "Don't look at it." Before I could react, the temperature in the room dropped sharply. The lights began to flicker, and the dark figure I had seen in the living room appeared in the corner. I couldn't see its face. It wore some kind of semi-transparent black veil that covered it from head to toe. I felt its gaze fixed on me. I was frozen in place, unable to move, as that thing slowly advanced toward me, filling the room with a piercing, deafening noise, as if my head were about to burst. I don't know how I managed to get out of the room. I ran down the hallway without looking back, with the echo of that noise still ringing in my ears. Though I reached the living room, I felt that presence right behind me, chasing me. But just before I crossed the door, I heard the old woman murmur again, in a broken tone, I saw it too, and it never left. I never went back to that house. I didn't even call to quit. I just left and didn't look back. But since then, every time I'm alone, I feel that same gaze on me, as if that figure had left the old woman and is now watching me, stalking me.
The Forgotten Spirit.
Caring for a retirement home didn't seem like a big deal, but when I saw an elderly man who wasn't on the list of residents, I knew something terrifying was happening. A few months ago, I started working as a night caregiver in an old retirement home for the elderly. There were stories about that place, rumors of apparitions and strange events, but I took the job anyway. The first night passed quietly, with the occasional creak of the wooden floors and the ticking of wall clocks marking the hours. I remember on my second night, as I was doing my rounds through the hallways, I noticed something strange. In one of the corridors, a tall, shadowy man was standing halfway down the hall, facing away. Thinking he was one of the residents, I approached to help him back to his room. But when I was just a few steps away, he vanished, as if he had never been there. I froze, unsure if my eyes had deceived me or if it was simply fatigue making me see things. After that night, everything changed. On the third night, as I walked through the garden, I felt the atmosphere grow heavy. The air seemed thick, as if something invisible was compressing it, and it was difficult to breathe. When I reached the living room, I felt a presence behind me, like two eyes burning in the darkness, fixed on my back. I turned quickly, and there he was again. The same man as before, standing in front of a window, staring at me. This time, his figure was clearer. He wore old, worn clothing, and his face was partially hidden by the shadows of the night. But the most disturbing part was his eyes. Empty, lifeless, and full of malice, as if they held centuries of resentment. When I tried to approach to say something, he vanished once more, leaving me alone with a deep cold that chilled me to the bone. I spoke to some of the older workers, hoping to find an explanation, but no one said anything, trying to convince me that it was all in my imagination. That day I went home thinking about what I had seen during the night. I decided it was better to leave it behind and continue with my job. The next few nights were worse. Every time I was alone, I could feel him nearby, though I couldn't see him. Doors would close by themselves, and slow, echoing footsteps would follow me, getting closer and closer. Once, while I was in the kitchen, I felt his cold breath in my ear, like someone whispering without saying anything. Just a disturbing silence. Each night his presence grew stronger, as if feeding on my fear, as if waiting for something from me. The fifth night was the last I worked there. I was in the main office, reviewing and organizing the residents' records. Suddenly, the air filled with a nauseating stench. And then I saw him, standing on the other side of the desk, staring directly at me. This time his figure was sharp, and there was no mistaking him for just any elderly man. I could clearly see his gaunt face, his pale, wrinkled skin, and his empty eyes reflecting intense hatred and uncontrollable rage. He seemed like he wanted to say something, but his cracked lips wouldn't move. Then he finally spoke. His voice was guttural and deep, a mix of pain and anger. "I don't want to be alone. Don't leave me alone." The voice echoed in my ears as if coming from everywhere, surrounding me. My heart raced, feeling like it was about to burst. I tried to run, but my legs refused to move, as if something invisible was holding me. The man began to approach slowly, and moments later, I saw how he stretched his arm toward me, trying to reach me, his bony fingers only inches from my face. I screamed like I had never screamed before in my life. I don't know how, but I managed to gather the courage to run. I bolted out of the office, dropping my keys and everything I had in my hands. I ran through the hallways, feeling his presence behind me and hearing his words in my head, like an echo chasing me. When I finally reached the exit door, the cold vanished, and I could breathe normally again. I never went back. The next day, I called my supervisor and quit without giving any explanations. But since that night, every time I'm alone and everything is silent, I feel like someone is watching me. Something tells me it's that man who's still waiting and won't stop searching for company. Thank you for journeying with us through the dark passages of these stories. If you enjoyed them, give us a like, share, and subscribe so you don't miss more tales of terror. Until next time, where fear will once again be your companion.